Welcome back to Decode Healthcare with Harshal. I'm absolutely pumped to have you here for this explainer. Listen, if you joined us for part 17, you know we got deep into the weeds with the rigorous rules of level of detail and specificity. But today, we're shifting gears. We're zooming out for a massive overhead look at the entire ICD-10 CM library. Our mission today is completely conquering section IB3 of the CMS official guidelines. We're going to look at the complete alphanumeric spectrum, literally from A00.0 all the way down to U85, and figure out exactly how these massive chapters are split up to capture the reality of patient care.
So here's our quick roadmap for today's explainer. We'll start with a welcome to the spectrum, break down the three major pillars, discuss why this range actually matters, hit our compliance checkpoints, and then finish up with a little teaser on signs and symptoms.
All right, part 1, welcome to the spectrum and section IB3 of the CMS guidelines. Let's dive right in. Let's look straight at the source. And remember, official CMS guidelines strictly override any textbook habits you might have picked up over the years. Look at the explicit language CMS uses here. It states that the appropriate code or codes from A00.0 through T88.9, 00 through Z99.8, and U00 through U85 absolutely must be used to identify all reasons for the encounter. This is a brilliant rule, honestly, because it means you can't just pick one block of codes and call it a day. You are literally required to utilize the full spectrum to accurately capture the patient's complete clinical picture.
Moving on to part 2, the three major pillars and how we architect the codebook.
To make sense of this massive range, we really need to look at how the codebook is actually built. I want you to picture the ICD-10 CM codebook as a giant 3D digital library, right? And it has shelving units divided into three giant color-coded sections. You've got your main core from A to T, your support system in the Z codes, and your emergency reserves in the U codes. Basically, every possible human condition is organized into one of these three distinct areas.
Let's zoom in on that first pillar, spanning A00 to T88. This is your main core. It holds all your standard active illnesses, diseases, conditions, and injuries. We're talking everything from an infectious disease like tuberculosis over in the A codes, all the way to a traumatic injury like a fractured femur in the S codes. They all live right here on these shelves. This is really the meat and potatoes of clinical coding. Next up, we have the second pillar, which spans Z100 to Z99. I love calling this the support system. These codes capture factors influencing health status and contact with health services. Basically, this is where you find the background story of your patient. Are they a genetic carrier for a disease? Do they have a personal history of a malignant neoplasm? Or maybe they're just presenting for a routine screening. The Z codes provide the absolutely crucial context that surrounds those active illnesses. And finally, the third pillar holds the U codes, spanning U00 to U85. These are our emergency reserves. They're specifically designed for special purposes and new emerging health threats. For instance, this is exactly where the classification system houses the code for COVID-19, that's U07.1, as well as vaping-related disorders like U07.0. Whenever the medical world faces a sudden, unexpected crisis, the U codes are the ones that get activated.
Okay, part 3, why the range matters and jumping those alphanumeric barriers.
So how does this all build into your daily workflow? Why does understanding these three distinct ranges matter so much for us? Well, because a complete claim almost always requires you to jump across these alphanumeric barriers. Think about a single clinical encounter. Let's say a patient comes in with a fractured ankle. That primary problem pulls an S code from the main core, right? But then documentation shows the patient has a history of smoking. Boom, that pulls a Z code from the support system. Oh, and they just tested positive for COVID-19, which pulls a U code from the emergency reserves.
The whole point here, and this is huge, is that coding just the primary sickness, just that fractured ankle, is simply not enough. You are legally required by the CMS guidelines to cross-reference these ranges. You've got to drop in those secondary background factor codes from the Z and U chapters to lock everything together cleanly. That is how you tell the patient's entire clinical story. Which brings us to part 4, the compliance checkpoints, and the real risk of incomplete coding.
Let's talk about what happens when things go wrong and how neglecting these rules can completely throw off your risk adjustment models. If you submit a claim that totally ignores background factors like Z codes or special U codes, you're submitting a non-compliant claim, period. You lose massive data accuracy. Remember, it's not just about coding the main sickness, it's about coding the full alphanumeric reality. When you compare a non-compliant claim to a fully compliant full-spectrum claim, the difference in accurately reflecting the patient's true severity of illness is literally night and day.
The official guidelines explicitly instruct us to code all documented conditions that coexist at the time of the encounter and affect patient care. This direct instruction is what ensures data integrity. Ignoring those supporting pillars is a massive compliance risk because you are quite literally ignoring a part of the patient's active medical profile that directly impacts how they're managed.
But when you actually do this right, when you properly report the full range of codes, bringing in those history and special factor codes right alongside the primary diagnosis, your ideal claim composition shows a risk adjustment dial that jumps straight up into the fully compliant green zone. It perfectly proves that you've done your due diligence in evaluating the entire medical record.
And finally, Part 5, a quick teaser on signs and symptoms and what's coming next.
To wrap up today's explainer, just remember that mastering section IB3 means confidently utilizing the entire alphabet from A to U to protect your data accuracy. If you found this breakdown helpful, please do me a favor. Hit subscribe, drop a like, and share it with your fellow healthcare professionals. But listen, we aren't done with the guidelines yet. I want to leave you with a provocative question to chew on. When are you legally required to code a symptom, and when is it completely forbidden? Join us next time in Part 19, where we tackle section IB4 and uncover the golden rule of coding signs and symptoms. Catch you then.